Greetings and welcome once again to Aspects of Aliyah. We're going to continue on our theme of warfare, and I've had one or two comments that have come in, and I'm pleased that you found it helpful in getting a better understanding of the whole concepts of warfare from a theological and historical viewpoint. I personally believe that history and theology are very closely intertwined, and really one interprets the other and vice versa. So we're going to pick up where we left off. We spoke about just war. So we're going to speak now about the principles of just conduct. So in a sense, we looked at the operation of warfare, how it should be pronounced and so on. We're going to look at just conduct, which is known as jus in bello, just conduct. So the principles concerning just conduct are directed towards military commanders unless subordinate in the first place, or assumed, that's a word, isn't it, or assumed to be competent and, very importantly, are accountable to the state undertaking the action involved in the hostilities. The said individuals are considered to be accountable for their actions. An infraction of the rules of just war and just conduct can lead to prosecution under war crimes legislation. So, just conduct is just as important as the principles surrounding the event. Now, traditionally, they're divided into three categories that fall under this: discrimination, proportionality, and responsibility. Just run that by you again. Discrimination, proportionality, and responsibility. Discrimination concerns those who are legitimate targets in war. Proportionality concerns how much force is morally appropriate, which of course is a complete minefield. And responsibility concerns those who direct policy and oversee its operations. There is obviously some overlap within these three categories, but sadly, they are quite vague in some areas and open to various points of interpretation. So the first principle of just conduct is that it is unjust to attack indiscriminately. Indiscriminate attacks lead to wide-scale, what's euphemistically known as collateral damage, and large-scale loss of life amongst civilians or non-combatants. Now, there is a problem in here, this category immediately, because in some parts of the world, everybody is considered to be a combatant or a potential combatant. The Palestinians frequently accuse Israel of saying every man, woman and child is a soldier, therefore a legitimate target. So the doctrine of double effect offers a justification for killing civilians in war, so long as their deaths are not intended but are accidental. Collateral damage, if you like. So the constraints are: the bad effect is proportional to the desired military objective. The bad effect is unintended. Now, again, Israel versus Iran and its proxies. The effects are unintended when civilians are hurt. In the case of human shields, the sighting of weapons in hospitals, schools, family homes, and the like. The bad effect is not a direct means to the good effect. For example, indiscriminate or saturation bombing. It's rather interesting how bombing or aerial assault, which has changed now enormously because of the employment of drones, works up. Some of my students some years ago said they listened to a lecture that I'd given on how Germany went from one of the world's most civilized and cultured nations into Nazism, world on the Holocaust in the space of 10 years. And when we discussed this, one of the students said, well, how come went from sort of minor, went from aerial skirmishes to bombing raids, and then the atomic weapon in 5-6 years, so to speak? Well, the answer to that is that things build up and get traction. I mean, it started off, aerial warfare started with somebody throwing a random bomb with a fuse on it out of the plane. Then it went to dropping a single bomb. Then it went to pinpoint bombing, went from there to saturation bombing, and then eventually you got mass destruction with nuclear weapons. So things build, and this should be understood when we're looking at current conflicts. Things build up. Starts off with something fairly mild and builds, and people become inured to it. What is outrageous starts off with something minor, and it builds and builds and builds, and people get used to it and more used to it and more used to it. And it's very similar to moral decline in ethics in general life. When I was a younger man, I wouldn't have recognised the world we're living today because of the shift on the ethical and moral compass. Divert slightly there, but what we're saying is it's unjust to attack indiscriminately. So bad effects or collateral damage that come that should not be intentional. Soldiers are obliged to take actions to minimise the foreseeable bad effects resulting from any course of action, even if it means they're confronted with two or more major tensions that are immediately observable. Well, in what we call stage 6 warfare, which is warfare in its modern guise, Iran and its proxies don't follow any of these things that we've spoken about so far. They don't give intention. October the 7th, no intention was given. And every rule of just conducting warfare was ignored. So, this doctrine of double effect we talk about in the modern period has got added tension. And the question is, what is permissible as collateral damage, because it might depend on the weapons used. There's a vast difference between a single shot out of a rifle and a tank shell, simply. As we say, I'm going to call it the Israeli-Arab conflict, or Israeli-Iran conflict, or whatever label you want to use, the Arab nations consider all Israelis to be soldiers and therefore legitimate targets, as we said. Secondly, in just warfare, and I hope this is helping you understand what's going on in Israel at the moment, there's a problem of progressive escalation of necessity. A strategy designed to inflict the minimal damage, when perceived to be non-effective, moves progressively to strategies which by their nature are more deadly. As we spoke about a few minutes ago, I'm just bringing this back together. Yeah, things start small and progressively get bigger. If don't take any notes of it, it just seems like a natural progression of things, but it actually isn't. So, what weapons are permissible in just combat? Which brings us, of course, to NCB, or nuclear, chemical, and biological warfare. None of these are new. They've been around for a long, long time. The Germans of the dubious distinction of being the first to employ weapons of mass destruction when it used mustard gas in the trenches in April 19th, 22nd of April 1915 to attack the British. That was the first example of chemical warfare. Although, of course, biological warfare, if you want, is not new. Goes right back to putting scorpions in clay balls and throwing them over city walls, poisoning wells, and so on, which we spoke about. Now, we've got a big question now, the question of proportionality. Now, we always hear, don't we, Israel's disproportionate response to terrorism. When we finish this session, I'm going to do a session, or we might even come in this if time permits, to try to explain why terrorism actually works. But we'll come to that momentarily. Proportionality. The convention, the various conventions, Hague Convention, Geneva Conventions, Human Rights Conventions, and international law, or law of international convenience, as I prefer to call it, insists that offensive action remains strictly proportional to the achievement of the objective desired. Now, how long is a piece of string? A difficulty here is that the end objectives may change as hostilities progress. In conventional wars, theoretically, it's possible to measure or calculate. Clausewitz suggested that the key element is to decide exactly what the situation being faced is and exactly what it is not. Now, this then is faced with enormous difficulty when facing terrorists who have no return address, no political geography to assault. I'm thinking particularly of Al Qaeda in this, and various other terrorist groups. Well, we could say there is an address actually, which is Tehran. However, as I say, face enormous difficulty. They have no return redress, no political geography to assault. Internationally agreed conventions regulating war must be obeyed, according to the UN and international courts of justice and war crimes courts and all these rather strange entities. So to employ more force than is minimally needed to achieve the objectives may cause the justice of the cause to be questioned. Well, is the entire destruction of the Jewish people in the land of Israel a legitimate aim of war? According to international convention, no, it isn't. Is there any other sanctions? What actions taken against around these proxies? Very little. Proportionality. What actually is proportional? Well, the proportionality is the amount of force that it takes to bring a halt in the hostilities. We've just had Armistice Day on the 11th of November. Armistice comes from Latin, which literally means to cease arms. Yeah, armor, stasis. Yeah. Stop of arms. And it's interesting when we look at the results at the end of World War One when this came, because it directly caused World War II. But we'll come to this in our next session. So proportionality is not, that your country is bigger than mine. It's not that you've got better weapons than I've got. It's not even you've got better intelligence than I've got. It's not you've got more soldiers than I've got. It's what amount of force, intelligence, tactics, and munitions are needed to achieve the end. So we'll take a break and we'll be right back.
If you are a Christian, then there is no question that you owe a great debt to the Jewish people. Unto them were entrusted the oracles of God. What does that mean? It means, if not for the faithfulness of the Jewish people, we would not have this. And therefore you would not know your God, and you would not know his Son.
Israel and the Jewish people are under attack right now, and we owe them everything. The least that we can do is support them in their hour of need. So please go to EzraInternational.org and give to the Emergency Relief Fund, and your dollars will be used to help displaced and traumatized Jewish people throughout the land.
And remember, if you do nothing, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jewish people from another place. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Please go to EzraInternational.org and give your best gift today.
Welcome back. Move on now to responsibility. The category asserts that the agents of war be held responsible for their action and with the qualification the actions of their subordinates. In a primary form, the argument posits that a soldier killing another soldier in a time of recognised conflict is acting in a legitimate manner. When soldiers employ their weaponry against non-combatants or pursue their enemy beyond the stated reasonable aims, then they are acting outside legitimate acts of war and are committing acts of murder. Terrorism is acts of murder. We saw the dreadful events in Amsterdam in the recent days, described as a pogrom by some. How none of those Israeli football fans were not killed, to me, is nothing short of a miracle. Anti-Semitism is on the increase, particularly by those masquerading to be pro-Palestine and the Gaza League of Pity and so on. Various entities that want to call themselves. But really, if they murder or commit acts of terrorism, they're not soldiers. They're not acting as part of war. They're acting as this new entity, a terrorist. I just like to call them a murderer personally, but there we go. So, just quickly, those in authority and those beneath them are responsible to behave in a reasonable manner to non-combatants, not blow them up, not knife them on the street, not set the buildings on fire, and so on. And, as we said, soldiers should not feel entitled to go on a rampage of rape and looting. To this we also add mala in se. Combatants are forbidden to employ weapons or methods which are evil in themselves, such as decimation, massacre for propaganda purposes, torturing prisoners of war, employing means of bringing about slow and painful deaths, and using weapons whose effects cannot be controlled, like dirty, radioactive chemical or biological warfare. Of course, the taking of hostages and raping the females daily and torturing the males in all kinds of ways that it's going on every day, and for those hostages that are still alive, assuming some still are alive, we can take is a complete contravention of everything that's human, everything that's legislated again is a daily practice. So we've got a problem of association and compliancy. The problem regarding non-combatants revolves around the question of soldiers who serve as non-combatants, such as medical staff and chaplains, and those who aren't involved in combat or face-to-face combat. So the question comes, are they legitimate targets? But it's rather difficult on some of these things. You see, the other issue of compliancy, is one that needs some good study and looking at. There's been much discussion on those who didn't actually commit the crimes, those who ordered them, oversaw them. How big is the measure of their guilt? So there's a lot of discussion on this matter. And Hannah Arendt, who was associated with Karl Popper, she wrote the definitive book on totalitarianism. I personally found some faults with it personally, but not as many as I found in their book, Eichmann in Jerusalem. Eichmann's defense that he was just a soldier following orders, and the notion of immunity from guilt for simply obeying orders or complicity with a given ideology is not considered valid. John Fry, the special consultant to the US War Crimes Tribunal, the International AMT in Nuremberg between 1947 and 1949, made a very salient comment that I think should be applied to the modern situation we've got in the Middle East. Fred said this: crimes against international law are committed by men, not by abstract entities. Crimes are not committed by ideology. I'll add to that. Crimes are not committed by ideologies. They're driven by ideologies and are committed by men. So then the next thing is the post-war things, ethical tensions following war, jus post bellum. There's an old saying that it's not over until it's finished. The modern era has seen many examples of hostilities ceasing only to be replaced by a fresh set of tensions arising from improper, irrational, optimistic, naive, or even vengeful programs after cessation of hostilities, or when the end is near or nearly reached. Mentioned earlier, the peace settlement of Treaty of Versailles caused nothing but political upheaval and economic disaster for Germany, both tensions which were direct causes of the rise of Nazis in Germany. The state should only seek the termination of war when it's considered that the vindication of the aggrieved had been reasonably reached. So, United Nations and people, how are you going to find a just cause for termination in the conflicts in the Middle East? Resolution only is reached when the defeated were ready to accept terms of surrender, terms of reparation, compensation, return of forfeitures, and submission to international justice. It's important that as Christians we understand these things. It's very well saying we're Christians, we live in the world but we're not of it, but we are called to be salt and light, and we need to understand how internationality works, what the principles of warfare are, because we live in a world that's full of war, with many more on the horizon. How long will it be before we'll be talking about these things with China and Taiwan, I wonder? And we can go on. Will the conflict in Ukraine end as it should do? Will it be possible to find a solution that's acceptable? Or will it just flare up again? If a settlement can be reached with Vladimir Putin, how long will it be before he tries somewhere else? Make no mistake, I said in a lecture in the late 90s, when Vladimir Putin introduced the presidential flag with Romanov's image in the middle of it, he told you exactly what he was trying to do. People say he's trying to bring the Soviet Union back. No, he isn't. He's trying to bring the Tsarist Empire back. Bigger, more effective, and totally domineering. Autocracy, nationalism, and orthodoxy. Orthodoxy in the non-Christian church sense, of course, is his intention. So, just conduct should have the right intentions, which is self-explanatory, and we just need to speak about discrimination before just wind this up, really. There's got to be a proper differentiation between the political and military elite, the soldiers and civilians. Harsh and punitive measures should only be taken against the leadership. Collective punishment falls into this category in another sense. In the case of post-Nazi Germany, polls taken before the setting of historic amnesia, let me say that again, historical amnesia in the 1950s, showed a high level of support for National Socialism. If you come across my book, Words from Scroll of Fire, there's a piece in there that speaks about this, and it gives the statistics for how many German people still supported National Socialism after the end of hostilities. And it wasn't really until 1953 the last remnants of support for National Socialism, I'm not going to say disappeared because it's still there to this day. I'll use the word dissipated. The polls were very, very high after the war. So don't run away with the idea that in 1945 Germany suddenly became, shall we say, underwent a new thought process. The whole thing in post-war Germany, the things that happened, really were a fear of international revolution by Russia. And it was only in 1953, really, when Austria was released from the Soviet Union. A lot of people don't know that, by the way. 1953, that things really began to change quite radically. So, do just war theories have any value? By that, we're talking about just conduct as well. Historically, the just war tradition has served primarily as a moral boundary to limit more than endorse, approve, or commence the use of military force. Just war theories only have value if peace can be established in some fairly immediate, discernible way, not just a long-range hypothesis that some future action may be taken or prudent. Just war theories, containing all the elements that we've spoken about, sound appealing. They're obviously geared to where all parties share the same or a similar set of values and ethics. We're back in the Middle East now. In the past, mutually agreed rules of combat commonly evolved between at least two similar opponents and assumptions that all that began to change. The changing face of war has caused doubts in some quarters, particularly in the USA, regarding realpolitik, considering that war needs greater justification than purely national interests. In the Tudor period, Thomas More, that's More, in his work Utopia, allowed for war only as a defensive measure. However, he claimed in reality that no war that he knew in history, past or present, or in the foreseeable future, was just in any sense. So Thomas More used just war theory, or its primary form, to condemn all wars. So the question arises at the time of writing if there is a place for moral and ethical concepts in the sphere of conduct within international relations. The reality of the situation is that historically this has seldom been the case. In the case of war against terrorism, the immediate tension is the cultural gulf. The cultural, social, and religious gulf between the current parties at the present time. How can one reasonably expect a radical Islamic nation such as Iran and its proxies to engage in any sort of meaningful dialogue? In Western cultures, both governments and the media continually fail to interface with violence in the Middle East as they rigidly attempt to draw understanding for the conflict and its resolution from a Western Judeo-Christian mindset. And by Judeo-Christian, I'm going to insert the word assumed. How can suicide bombers expected to observe a convention of just war? So, is just war just a metaphor? Is it just a good idea? Is it a bankrupt ideology? Does the whole thing need to be revisited? So, until we meet again, may God be with you and those that you love.